Our Chief Executive Officer, Shri Pradeep Agarwal ji, Executive Director, Shri Probir Roy, respected Principal of the Heritage College, Dr. Pushpita Ranjan Bhattacharya, my colleagues, staff of the Heritage Group of Institutions, faculty members of other prestigious colleges, and all the students who have joined the webinar today. I, Ankita Rajkarya, Assistant Professor of the Department of Economics, the Heritage College, welcome you all to today's session. The Heritage College started its journey in the academic year 2016-17 with a view to become a world-class institution with ample opportunities in science and social sciences. The college is affiliated to the University of Calcutta and follows the same curriculum. Our topic for the webinar today is the impact of COVID-19 on the labor market of the world economy and responses for revival. And we are privileged to have amidst us Dr. Shravani Sahar, Professor Marian Rizov, and Dr. Dragana Radikic. I would like to take this opportunity to introduce our speakers. Dr. Shravani Sahar is a development and macroeconomist. Dr. Sahar is deeply interested in political economy, terrorism and tourism economics, economic growth, development economics, international trade issues. The main areas of her research focus on causes and effects of corruption across nation and corruption's relations with institutional factors such as democracy and economic freedom. She has also engaged in research involving political instability and its effects on tourism, demands, and economic growth. Dr. Shravani Sahar holds a PhD in economics from Massey University, New Zealand, Masters of Economics from University of Sydney, Australia, MSc in Economics from University of Calcutta, India. She also holds a professional teaching qualification from Higher Education Academy, United Kingdom as fellow. Professor Marian Rizov holds professional chair in economics at the Lincoln International Business School, University of Lincoln, United Kingdom. Professor Rizov's main research interest concerns applied microeconomics and empirical management. Initially trained as an agricultural economist, he has developed a diverse research portfolio covering economic development and productivity, food economics and agribusiness, labor economics, HR management, and industrial relations. Professor Rizov holds a PhD from Catholic University of Leuven, Belgium. In recent years, Professor Rizov has focused his research into the domain of industrial relations, HR, and firm labor management relations practices, as well as firm performance and firm productivity analysis, which has attracted external funding from British Academy, Low Pay Commission, and the Slovak VUB Foundation. Dr. Dragana Radikic is a senior lecturer in economics at the Lincoln International Business School, University of Lincoln, United Kingdom. Prior to joining the University of Lincoln, Dr. Radikic has worked as a postdoctoral research officer at the University of Cambridge. Dr. Radikic's area of research is economics of innovation, in particular, policy evaluation, open innovation, innovation in services, R&D cooperation, and exports and innovation. She has published extensively on these topics at top-ranked international journals, but also on topics of entrepreneurship, education, and finance. Dr. Radicic holds a PhD from Staffordshire University, United Kingdom. I would now like to request Dr. Debashish Mazumdar, Head of Department of Economics, the Heritage College, to kindly give the welcome address. Over to you, sir.
Good afternoon, everybody present in this webinar. Respected Sri Pradeep Agarwalji, Chief Executive Officer, the Heritage Group of Institutions, Dr. Pushpita Ranjan Bhattacharya, Principal, the Heritage College, Mr. Prabir Roy, Executive Director, the Heritage Group of Institutions, our honorable resource persons, and today's panelists, Dr. Shravani Sahar, Professor Marian Rizov, and Dr. Dragana Radicic of Lincoln International Business School, University of Lincoln, UK, head of the departments and faculty members of different departments of the Heritage College and the sister institutions of the Heritage Group, other dignitaries from India and abroad, participants from other institutions, and my dear students. I, on behalf of the principal, the Heritage College, and on behalf of the Department of Economics of the Heritage College, cordially welcome you all in this webinar. As you all know, the COVID-19 pandemic and the associated socio-economic crisis are posing huge challenges before the governments and the common people in the affected regions of the world, raising many novel issues and imposing wrenching trade-offs. So, though this crisis is global, but its impacts are deeply local, so far as the labor market is concerned, we observe that millions of workers have lost their jobs with a sudden fall in the demand for labor, both in the formal and informal segment of the markets. And we observe that the informal sector workers are more affected, and they are susceptible to both health shock as well as economic shock. The economic shock is likely to be much more critical or severe for a country like India. The economic shock, as we have seen, as we have been experiencing in India, that we observe that the economic slowdown, even we have been experiencing economic slowdown even since pre-COVID period, compounding the existing problems of unemployment, low incomes, rural distress, malnutrition, and widespread inequality. Secondly, we observe that the large informal sector, as you observe in India, about 91% of the total workforce, they are in the informal sector. So they are more vulnerable to such economic shock. Now, despite all such odds, there are definitely some way out to overcome this precarious situation. And we now have an opportunity to build a new, just, and fair social contract between the governments and the people. This includes universal social safety nets and health insurance, the fiscal stimulus offered by different governments throughout the globe are also to be taken into account, and a sustainable solution to this present crisis needs global coordination among countries and a prudent convergence of development policies for the optimization of COVID-19 response. I hope all these issues will be covered, will be discussed at length in this webinar, and surely result in some fruitful learning outcomes through the deliberations of our honorable speakers, as well as through the subsequent interactions. Thanks to all of you for your kind presence in this webinar. I would now request our panelists, Dr. Shravani Sahar, Professor Marian Rizov, and Dr. Dragana Radicic to take over the session, please.
Thank you, Professor Debashish Majumdar and Dr. Pushpita Ranjan Bhattacharya and economics team of Heritage College. And we really like to thank you all on behalf of Lincoln Accounting and Finance Research, Economics and Finance Research Group, Lincoln International Business School, University of Lincoln, Professor Marian Reserve, Dragana Radrick, and myself. We like to thank you all for this opportunity and that organizing this because this is very timely and it is really relevant for this current situation. And we really like to thank you all, the team. Marian, you can start first.
Okay, right. Hello. Good afternoon to colleagues from India, and thank you for organizing this webinar. Yeah, okay. So, I mean, obviously, the COVID-19 it's a what the economists call it's a shock to the economy, and it's a particular one which basically have demand and supply side effects, which is quite unusual for previous types of shocks. So the main implication of this is that in general this type of shock will accelerate the processes and the trends that existed before the shock, considering specifically the labor market. And I'll just outline very briefly like the framework from which I see the labor market functioning in recent years, in recent decades. It's basically the labor markets are affected by technological change. So they're like the traditional or canonical model of this effects is the skill bias technological change model, where we have technology complementing the high skills, and this canonical model that applied up to about the year 2000, and it was able to explain the kind of the processes that occurred in the labor markets during this period, during the period prior, basically the last few decades of the last century, is increasing the labor demand for high skills, and of course the effects of wages goes in the same direction. Higher labor demand for high skills is associated with also higher wages for this group of workers, while low skill workers have relatively declined in terms of their supply of labor and demand for labor that they faced, as well as generally their wages have been declining relative to high skills. So, however, in more recent times, since in the last 2 decades, this model didn't really approximate well the processes in the labor market, and new framework have emerged, which is called the routine skill biased technological change model. And in this new model is designed to fit the observation that, in fact, in the last 20 years or so, there is a polarization in the labor market. Higher skill employment is in higher demand, but also the low skill jobs also increased in demand, and also this is matched by changes in the wages. So higher wages in the top side of the distribution, and also in the low side. So these two models, they relate both to the technology effects. So the strongest thing, the main driving force in the labor market is really technology in last decades, and of course the mechanisms that drive this the effects in the two models are quite different in terms of the skill bias technological change. It is really the technology complementing the high skill workers performances, This is what is the main channel. While in the routine bias technological change, which actually more correctly should be referred to as anti-routine bias technological change, actually the new technologies replace workers. They don't complement, they replace the routine tasks and the jobs with routine task intensity, high routine task intensity. So, so therefore, actually, the way of working of these models is quite different, but the implication is in some ways similar in terms of high-skilled workers, so that the demand for high-skilled workers increases. And in the prevailing current model of routine bias technological change, so there is a demand also for low-skill manual workers, while what is generally in the empirics and in the is evident the medium sort of type of occupations which are characterized by routine tasks and mostly in good production, they decline. So workers are displaced, and then the low-skilled workers find new jobs, new opportunities in low-skill manual jobs, which are less automated. So this, so on the backdrop of this sort of framework, that I mean, I think it's good to have a framework of thinking, and this is the one that I see as, I mean, this is the prevailing theory of the labor market in last decades. So my kind of speculation, and also I guess some very early analysis and anecdotal evidence would suggest that this process of routine bias technological change is probably likely to accelerate with the COVID-19 crisis, which basically disrupted the markets. The interaction between supply and demand has been broken down in many ways, and so well, in the short run, obviously it's a really big turbulence. It's a churning in the labor market, but so the framework, obviously, in the theory is about explaining a bit longer term effects that we can expect, and what we can expect is really probably obviously automation to increase further. So to what extent automation can become also important for low-skill manual jobs is something to speculate about. But so the nature, obviously, the nature of this framework and analysis is really to look at the type of tasks that are performed in different jobs, and obviously tasks in low-pay manual jobs are harder to automate, or this is kind of the general view, but also harder in sense it's probably not economical to automate. So this type of jobs probably will persist. And what you see from the example of COVID is that I mean, obviously in the UK, I suppose in India, maybe in some ways similarly, we talk about the importance of queue workers. And we have now obviously understood the importance of queue workers has been highlighted. So this type of occupations generally considered like a low skill, but they are like manual occupations, interpersonal type of tasks performed. So this in the health services, as well as in a number of service sectors. So it's a big area of the labor market, the services. So health services being key for the situation of COVID-19 epidemic. So their role and their importance have been well established, but other parts of the services sector may have declined just due to the disruption of the markets. And it's about really to speculate, to argue how quickly this other type of services, again based on interpersonal relationship, can bounce back. Retail, it's I mean very early evidence suggests that it is likely to recover to a certain degree. And yeah, so from other hand, so the main message that I want to kind of convey is that yeah, the processes that existed before COVID-19, they'll be continuing. And my kind of argument or speculation is that these trends might be amplified by the crisis, because this crisis highlighted the importance of well, many type of activities went online, so the importance of being able to perform different types of job tasks independent of environment, in immediate physical environment is important. So links to resilience, or the resilience will be linking to further use of technology in some ways, but obviously there is much more to resilience. So this is one thing that we can discuss in a later point of this webinar. Yeah, so I'll stop here. Just I thought I'll outline a framework of thinking that well, some of you probably well informed about, or maybe you have different views as well, so which is interesting to hear. But what you can expect is that yeah, so the markets, the demand side, given fundamentals, which fundamentals probably from pre-COVID-19. The demand side could be expected to recover to a certain degree relatively quickly. I mean, there's a theory, obviously, that I've seen recently put forward by economists, which is a V-shape recovery. So means like a sharp decline, sharp return to pre-crisis situation. But this theory, well, it's to be proved wrong or right, but there is now also some arguments that it might not be correct. So I would not talk at this stage about, given all this kind of background, what could be done, which not I don't think it's easy answer, but obviously I can discuss later on in a question setting, I think, about what possible measures, which is maybe quite generic, but this could be relevant to also Indian context. Professor Mazumdar actually referred to some important aspects that could be attempted or should be strived towards to be implemented in the labor market. So especially vulnerables. Like a non-standard labor arrangement type of workers, which are like part-time. Here in the UK, you have 0-hour contract workers, like informal type of occupation workers. Like here is known as Uberization of the labor arrangements. What was mentioned just now in Indian context, informal labor arrangements are very prevalent. So yeah, this is the most vulnerable kind of segments of the labor market. And if in India this segment is like 90%, obviously the situation is quite severe. Yeah, so in a European context, it's really obviously supporting. So the role of supporting this type of workers, and given the social sort of safety networks that exist in European context, it's through government interventions, and also there's surely also measures that again managed by the government and aimed at involving the employers as well. That should be considered. Well, so I pass the floor to my colleagues to take it forward.
Yeah, I can request Dragana, if you can go ahead first, then I can present.
Thank you, everyone. I'm very happy to be with you today, and thank you very much for the invitation. I want to talk a little bit about employment creation and work culture in post-academic world and post-pandemic world. And of course, I agree with Professor Marian that basically this crisis has will definitely speed up some processes that have started way before the crisis, way before the pandemic, such as the Internet of Things, such as automation, digitalization, smart manufacturing, artificial intelligence. I think all those processes that will be introduced probably at faster rate. Of course, they will be introduced where there is capacity to be introduced faster. But before that, I would also want to reflect on something that Professor said. I think that we can all agree that government support and government intervention, national and international, is absolutely the key, and not just in this phase of emergency measures, but also after the economies and the world start to recover from pandemic. And we economists know that collaboration between employers and government and workers to a certain degree is absolutely critical to the recovery. I'm not going to go into details how much of this collaboration will happen. We'll have to wait and see. But we know that G20 countries have announced that they will inject more than $5 trillion into the world economy, because obviously, in particular, developing countries need international support. So I will talk about the labor market, but primarily I will be talking about government intervention in the labor market, in developing economies in the particular, and in particular after this pandemic. What we know now is that probably the two key words that we are facing nowadays when we talk about this crisis is resilience and also agility. So we have to be very fast, governments, firms, households, individuals. We have to think very fast and react very fast with what is happening at the moment with pandemic, but also what will happen after when this emergent health crisis is over. So governments and their support is equally important immediately now, as it will be important in the medium and the long run. And you very well know that all governments in the world have been engaged in all sorts of different policy mixes to help the economy by providing financial relief for enterprises, particularly micro and small enterprises that are most vulnerable if we talk about firms, and also providing income support for workers. What will happen in the future probably is that we will need a demand-led employment strategy for a medium to long run recovery, which this demand-led employment strategy involves promoting employment creation in strategic sectors. It involves active labor market policies. I will talk about that shortly. Use of technology, no doubt about that. Also, the governments, national and international, obviously will have to work hard to restore consumer and business confidence. So we avoid deeper economic recession and depression. I would say that in terms of fiscal stimulus and in terms of employment, as we know in economic theory, government spending has a larger multiplier rather than reducing taxes or increasing taxes where they can be increased. So I think that one of the valid suggestions is for governments to boost demand in the construction sector through infrastructure-based stimulus packages. This is particularly relevant, in my opinion, for developing economies, because we all know that developing economies are plagued with poor infrastructure, physical and digital infrastructure. Obviously, this digital infrastructure was the key and is the key type of infrastructure at the moment where we have lockdowns in many countries. Physical infrastructure, of course, will be equally important once all the restrictions are lifted. So my point here is that governments in developing countries, by investing public money in infrastructure projects, that means very little austerity measures, if any austerity measures, because I think we've learned a lesson from the global financial crisis when it comes to austerity measures. So the government will at the same time be able to attract a lot of workers that have lost their jobs, either because they were working in informal sectors or because they lost their jobs even if they were working in formal sectors. I'm not going to talk about monetary policy a lot. We know that monetary policy is quite different in developed economies versus developed economies. In developed economies, of course, governments and central banks should lower interest rates, which is happening in all the countries. Now, I'm also not going to talk about how governments, in particular in developing economies, will finance the lack of government funds, because obviously that's an issue in itself and a big topic that we could dedicate another webinar about it. So I'm just going to mention some issues in the passing when it comes to government spending and when it comes to reduction in government revenue. So my point is active labor market policies will be critical after this immediate health crisis in every country across the globe, developed and developing economies. And the governments here should focus on one pillar particular when it comes to active labor market policy, and that is public employment programs, which ties nicely to my suggestion about government spending and investing in infrastructure and then employing people who've lost their jobs during the crisis. Equally important, of course, is support to micro firms and self-employed. That is naturally very important for India. As you've mentioned, more than 90% of people are in informal sector, employed in informal sector, self-employed. So support to micro firms and self-employed is very important at the moment, critical, but it will be equally important in the future, post-crisis period. I'm just going to briefly talk about developed economies because I think developing economies can find their chances here as well. When it comes to future of work, when it comes to automation, the gig economy, retraining workers, because a lot of scholars and policy analysts are envisaging new jobs that will emerge from the green economy, science and health research, and digital infrastructure. And given that India has a comparative advantage when it comes to, for example, IT and providing business consultancy services, I think that India has very good chances to find its share of the pie when it comes to jobs that will emerge post-crisis. I think that the gig economy will be even more important after the crisis in post-COVID period rather than before. So people will probably focus, a lot of them, on finding flexible, temporary or freelance jobs, use online platforms. That's why digital infrastructure is very important at the moment, and it will be equally important in the nearby future. And I just want to say that it's interesting, it's not all about technology. This crisis has also revealed that we need soft skills in people. These soft skills were very important before crisis. project management, leadership. But there is one particular skill that has emerged from this crisis, and it's emotional intelligence. And I think that's something that leaders and managers will pay a lot of attention in the future, because people obviously will be frightened and they will feel uncertain in terms of their health, in terms of their financial future. So those people who have skills when it comes to emotional intelligence will be very valuable to their companies. Also, there will be a lot of changes when it comes to doing jobs in offices. As we've seen that most, if not all jobs, white-collar jobs, continue to be conducted online, as we call it teleworking. So what some companies are already saying that they realize that they might not need to continue paying very expensive offices, to rent very expensive office spaces in the future, that they might reduce the number of people that are in the office at any point. So some people might work 1 or 2 days at home, the rest of the days in the office. So it's going to be some sort of change when it comes to work culture as well. Also, a lot of managers, in particular, in some period after the crisis, all the non-essential expenses will be minimized, which means that managers will look at the issue, why would someone travel for 2 or 3 days for 2 meetings or 1 meeting, when that meeting can happen on online platform. So that saves obviously money to the company. When we talk about pollution and sustainability, that has a very important and positive impact. So a lot of effects, either positive effects or opportunities, will happen in the period immediately after health crisis. But of course, then we have economic crisis. A lot of scholars are suggesting that we have a very good chance to simultaneously tackle economic recovery, inequality, and sustainability, all under one umbrella. So that is also quite an important point, because then there will be chances for creating green jobs. So those people who have lost their jobs because of COVID pandemic might find new jobs in green economy and green sectors, and not necessarily just in high-tech industries or knowledge-intensive services. So just briefly, when it comes to labor market, I think for developing economies, besides investment in infrastructure, minimum wage laws remain to be very important to be imposed. The sooner the better, of course. And specifically when it comes to India, there are a few things that I would particularly emphasize. Some of them I've already mentioned, like active labor market policies, in particular public employment programs. When it comes to formal sector jobs, as you probably know, what is happening at the moment with multinational companies is that they will consider diversifying their supply chains. And obviously neighboring countries, neighboring China's countries neighboring to China, will have a lot of opportunity to attract these multinational companies. For that, obviously, India should invest in physical infrastructure and digital infrastructure. Again, public employment programs would help with this a lot. Now we know when it comes to India that India has a lot of self-employed and micro entrepreneurs, which means that those businesses cannot enjoy economies of scale. And of course, you know very well what are the reasons for that. Professor Marian will talk about issues when it comes to flexible labor market. What are the positives? What are the negatives? So I'm just going to touch upon this. Another suggestion that would be some sort of food for thought is to have autonomous economic zones that are quite autonomous from the central government, so they can make decisions very fast. As I said at the beginning, reacting very fast is a absolute priority to governments, businesses, households, and individuals now and in the foreseeable future. And that would be it at this point when it comes to what I wanted to say about employment creation.
Thank you. Professor Marian Rizov and Dr. Dragana Radrik mentioned a lot of aspects in terms of labor market and in terms of India as well. I'll go through mainly trade issues and obviously migrating countries from one place to other place, what is the impact on that. So if we think about COVID-19, because definitely it is health-wise contagious, but in economy-wise it is contagious as well. So we have, because this economic crisis in terms of, we know that it is bringing us to recession, even going towards depression. But if we compare this crisis with Great Depression that happened in 1929 to 33, so there is a big difference between this one and this one, because Great Depression was more demand side effect. It was lack of demand. There was no such problem with supply side. But this effect, this crisis is different from that, because it has not only demand side effect, it has supply side effect as well. And that is how we need a lot of discussion is going on, and countries everywhere, government, they are trying to put a lot of measures in terms of demand side effect, like relief package, as well as we need to look at supply side effect more in terms of labor market. So when we talk about that, again, there is one specialty in this COVID crisis is it is not only affecting one or two countries, it is around the world. Both developed and developing countries, they are seeing that this crisis. Although if we can see in terms of COVID cases and death, we can see that developed countries suffer more than developing countries. Like countries like US, the biggest economy in the world, in terms of COVID cases, they are much higher, and in terms of COVID death also, country like US, UK, Italy. So these developed countries, they suffer a lot in terms of this issue, but developing country in terms of like COVID cases or death, they are not, but definitely we can see I have some example here, say developed country like US, UK, developing country, Asia, China, India, Hong Kong, Vietnam. So if we look at this, because these countries are very prominent in Asia, so in terms of COVID death or cases, not that compared to the developed countries, but in Africa also we can see in terms of these virus cases, they are not that effective, but definitely we can see Latin America, Brazil, now they are second in place, Mexico also, so they are seeing that very high effect. But if we look at the economic effect, so economic effect in terms of that, maybe we can say that economic effect is much bigger that in developing countries compared to the developed countries, because developed countries, they have lot of resources to cope up with this situation, but developing countries, we can see that the effect is in terms of job loss. So if we go through first, what are the impact in terms of COVID cases? So first thing is stop or supply side effect is production is stopped. Especially if we go to that, so if we go to that diagram, so here we can see that China, that is the hub of manufacturing sector. So because of that COVID-19 and lockdown, so production suffered a lot. And second step is we see that supply chain. And that supply chain, this diagram shows, it is not only China, the whole world is affected in here. So China is the hub of manufacturing, but if we look at in terms of bubble, that shows the size of the economy, and in terms of this dark line, that shows that how the importance of the economy and the countries are related with import and export. So addition to China, in East Asian country like Korea, Taiwan, Japan, they also suffered a lot in terms of production. And because of that, production goes down. And another third effect we can see is demand side effect. So there is a lot of, because of lockdown, lot of job losses, there is no demand or less demand, and also that consumer and investors, they have that perception, they wait and watch. So that is how we can see the impact is both demand and supply side. And in terms of the supply chain, that has a major impact throughout the world. Country like, for example, if we go back to the previous slide, country like Angola, they are totally dependent on export of oil. And in addition, we can see that oil price fallen very sharply, and they received that low, very low level of revenue. And that is how we can see that there is less demand, as well as they are suffering all this. So there is a big impact these countries they will face. Now, in terms of that, so we can see it has not only single country, both developed and developing countries, they are suffering, but maybe the impact is more on developing countries through this supply chain, through this lack of demand and supply loss or production. Now, in terms of growth, if we can see that what is the impact between 2019 and 2020. So as a whole, developed country, their suffering is say 1.7%. That was growth rate in developed countries in 2019. That came like the future prospective growth rate is minus 6.8%. Now, US is the hardest, he's suffering that 2.3% that was in 2019. Now their prospective growth is minus 6.1%. So it is a huge impact because we treat US as the biggest economy in the world. So we can see that their growth rate is in 2020 is minus 6.1%. So we can see how significant. Now, in terms of compared to that, maybe we can say developing countries, their growth was 3.7%, and now we can see minus 2.4%. China is the highest growth they shown for a long time. Now in 2019, 6.1% to it is 1%. So very low growth. India also, we can see 4.2% to minus 3.2. That is a big fall in the growth rate, because even last year, I think India overcome the Chinese growth rate. But now we can see that India also situation is really badly affected in terms of growth rate. Hong Kong, 0.8% to minus 7%. So these countries, even I think all countries, either developed and developing countries like Brazil, 1.1% to minus 8%, Mexico, minus 7.5%. So this figure shows that not only developed but developing countries, most of the countries in the world, their growth rate is really, really difficult situation for this COVID-19, fall in demand, fall in supply, and the supply chain, because countries, lot of countries, they are, say Hong Kong, they are related with their export and import ratio to GDP is more than 100%. So this country highly reliant on export and import. But because of this COVID-19, we can see that their growth is totally like export import because of lockdown. So this country, they are suffering. Vietnam, similar situation, export-import ratio, they are highly dependent on export-import. So that is a difficult task for them. But if we look at India, in that sense, India export is 19% and import is 22%. So in that way, India, it is not highly dependent on export-import. And so they have their own internal market. So demand is there, but the question is, we can see definitely loss of production and loss of output. So how that impact through sector? Definitely when we are talking about this supply side, the major impact is coming through labor market, because if there is no production, then unemployment. So in terms of unemployment, if we look at US current unemployment, say in March and April, so before that it was say 4% or close to 4%, but in March and April, that one is like in March it was 14.47%, and in May it is 13.3%. Now we know that most of the countries, they are opening up. Maybe that economy will start again, but definitely even economy started, but we can see because that lot of business, even government is supporting in different way, but lot of business, it is difficult to survive. And because of that, we can see that unemployment will, even in UK, the second quarter unemployment expectation is around 10%. So most of the, in India, current unemployment is around 27%. Even in India, we know that labor informal sector is very large volume. So in addition, we can see it is 27% unemployment in India. So in that respect, we can see it is a big fall in that supply side and its impact on labor market. And definitely now depends how country revive and recovered on that, and how unemployment situation they can control. And definitely we can see that changes in the work style. So if we look at the industry, how the industry structure in terms of agriculture, manufacturing and service sector, like US, UK, they are more, because we said the most hit for this COVID-19 is manufacturing or industry sector. But service sector is, even service sector, they still continued with, to some extent, with this working from home or online. Say retail sector, they have done lot of, gone through online services. So their situation is not that bad compared to the manufacturing sector. So country like US, UK, they are highly dependent on service sector. Maybe we can think their recovery will be much faster than those are highly dependent on manufacturing, like China. 40% is manufacturing or industry, service sector is 52%. But one good thing for India, because India is 62%, much more stronger in terms of service sector contribution to GDP. So in that way, we can think that it is a good way to think of revival is not very, very difficult. Instead, if it was more dependent on manufacturing sector. And also like Hong Kong, we see that industry sector is only 7%, 92% is. So those countries who are relied on service sector, their revival is much quicker than manufacturing sector. And now in terms of definitely employment or unemployment situation related with that, because if a country is more dependent on service sector, then we know that employment in the, like in India, employment in service sector is say 26%, sorry, employment in service sector is 32%, industry is 26%. Like UK, US, service sector employment is much higher than industry. Now the question here is, if a country like we are, because of this COVID-19, we have seen that shift of the working pattern and culture. Like lot of service sector, they are able to do online platform, and we can see that it is a growth of digital economy. And digital economy, it is good that it can, as Dragana mentioned, that it can save lot of cost saving for the employer, because there is no, maybe we can see economists can continue with that extent, because it is more successful last 3-4 months business they can do with this working from home or digital, using that digital economy. But for manufacturing sector, it is very difficult to use that working from home or digitalization. So that is how we can see that survive with that new normal situation, maintaining that social distancing and other criteria. It is really difficult to start the production immediately and recover quickly. So in that respect, we can definitely see that the shift of that unemployment will be much more in industrial sector, and that will remain for long. But the service sector, when economies start opening up, maybe service sector, those will get the job quickly and back to the work much quicker than manufacturing or industrial sector. And in terms of like, if we think about that, what is the effect of migration and labor market? Like definitely in India, we have seen that it is a regional migration from one state to other state. And like, because people, they don't get jobs, so they go to other place. Similarly, we can see definitely the international migration. So if we look at, say, globalization. So this is a picture like globalization, how countries are related. And especially we can see after 1995, like World Trade Organization, because trade is that going for long years. But most of the countries, developed and developing countries, especially developed countries, they went through liberalization or decentralization, privatization, mid-90s. Even if we can see that China, they open up their economy in 1978, India opened up 1991. So globalization is a major way to revive, and most of the Asian countries, they have seen their growth during with the help of this globalization, like bilateral trade agreement, regional trade agreement. We have NAFTA, EU is a big good example. Then in Asian countries also APEC. So what we can see, what is the advantage of this is we can get both developing and developed countries. They can help each other. And the most important thing is, if we get technology, free flow of capital and labor in one country to other country. But because of these COVID cases, now we can see that even if look at that America, their unemployment is say 13 or 14%. So in that case, definitely now we can see a lot of countries, they think about their own country, nationalism concept is growing, because definitely that when the unemployment is so high, maybe it is difficult for international migration, maybe next few years. But again, we cannot generalize, because we need to see that some specific skill. Because here we can see 13 or 14%, but we don't know whether it is unskilled labor or skilled labor. How much is the unskilled unemployment and how much is the skilled unemployment. So if there is, even we know, and also we can see that we don't, now it is digital economy or growth of the digital economy, maybe it is not necessary. We can sit anywhere to work and produce our output any parts of the world. So now it is maybe different platform. So it is difficult to say that international migration in terms of labor, what will happen, especially next 2-3 years. And even like globalization is a big question nowadays, because this scenario happened, especially countries, those are highly dependent on this export and import. Even they are not, maybe virus wise, they are not such affected. But because of this import and export restrictions, so they are really suffering their economy, both in terms of demand and supply. So this is a big question now, whether globalization is encouraging further or not. So, and also because of that globalization, we can see that lot of international organization, they came out to protect or to continue support that globalization. But lot of international institution also now under threat. So it is a big question nowadays, or maybe we need to think see that next 2-3 years what will happen. So in that respect, I can say that in terms of India's export import is not that highly to compared to other countries. They have their own internal market. And another important problem for India is we have a very high volume of informal sector. So in terms of government policies, so that can go to formal sector, but it is difficult for informal sector. So we know that a lot of countries government is giving lot of demand side effect, like relief packages, but need to concentrate on labor side as well. That will bring the production and supply increase. And because if government give relief, but if there is no production on things, then how come people get goods? Even they have money. So it is not only one-sided policies there. We need two-sided policies. And one good thing that I learned that in India, because India has very significant amount of agricultural sector, and this year production was not that bad. So in this case, we need to start thinking of, because even in UK, countries suffered in agriculture because they don't have labor to pick up the fruits or vegetable from the garden. So this happens, same thing in India also. So if we can keep that thing and see that how we can mobilize our labor resources to that sector, so that we cannot lose the agricultural production also. So this type of policy that government needs to think of.
So thanks to all of our panelists, namely Dr. Shravani Sahar, Professor Marian Rizal, and Dr. Dragana Radikic for their informative and enlightening lecture deliberations. As we have been receiving questions during the session, we'll now take up only a few questions due to obviously the time constraint. We have some questions from our students, young students, and I would request our students, they have formed some groups, Arbaz Ahmed and Shivam Maheshwari, to submit their question, please. Arbaz Ahmed and Shivam Maheshwari.
Good afternoon to everyone. This is Arbaz Ahmed. I'm a sophomore student of the Heritage College of the Economics Department. My question is to Dr. Dragana Radikic. So, ma'am, what do you think? As you have already elaborated, I just want to know more views of yours on the posterior period of this pandemic in ushering a new work culture, especially in developing countries. Can you please elaborate a bit more on that issue?
Yes, I can. Thank you for the question.
You're welcome.
Yes, I didn't pay. Obviously, we don't have time to cover all these important issues that we talked about today. We were just basically looking at the tip of the iceberg. As you can all appreciate, I think if our webinar would last for the whole day, we might be maybe able to cover quite a lot of questions. So when it comes to work culture in developing economies, obviously remote work is questionable because what kind of work can be done remotely is limited, in particular in developing economies. That is another issue. Obviously, office work will be affected, in my opinion, no matter whether the company is in developing economy or developed economy. To what degree, we don't know. Maybe in developing economies, employers will just put a barrier, like a plastic barrier around a table. And in that, people would start coming to office, all people that work in a particular office, but they would have these physical barriers. I know, I was of course mentioning a little bit more about advanced economies where they are planning to maybe focus more on remote working. Now, when it comes to manufacturing, I think in general, when it comes to manufacturing, and in particular larger firms, they will all move toward robotics and automation in the nearby future. It doesn't matter where they are located, because with all this technology, workers on the shop floor, they can communicate with their supervisors who can be at home or somewhere working remotely. And of course, by introducing robotics and even smart manufacturing where robots communicate with each other, that will reduce the need, of course, for more people being on the shop floor. Now, when it comes to, of course, developing economies, that is more in the future, because obviously for that you need investment to buy all these robots. But as far as I know, engineers are really trying to build, as we speak all the time, cheaper and cheaper robots. And I think that this crisis will speed up automation and introduction of robotics in manufacturing in all countries, definitely faster in advanced economies than in developing economies. But in developing economies, in the nearby future, obviously safety is number one. So you will have to respect 2-meter distance. You will have to, of course, hygiene will be critical. Even probably when we discover the cure for this virus, because this isn't the only virus in the world and it mutates and so on and so forth. But I think automation and smart manufacturing and fourth industrial revolution is something that is going to happen at a faster rate now than before the crisis. Of course, primarily in developed economies, but certainly some parts of that will happen in developing economies as well.
Thank you, ma'am.
I hope that answers your question.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am.
Our next question, again from our students, Adrija Chatterjee and Shaurika Banerjee. Are you there?
My question is to Professor Marian Rizov. What is your outlook towards job polarization as a potential post-effect in the developing countries of this pandemic?
Yeah, thank you very much for your question. It's relevant to what I was talking earlier as well. And well, it's as I kind of discussed. So the pandemic and this shock, which is quite a particular one, it normally what I would expect it to accelerate these processes that are going on before the actual pandemic emerged. So and then the main really process, and then also the model that we are referring to is really relevant to the labor market in the last couple of decades, which is polarization. And it's polarization in terms of high-end and low-end of jobs. And so on the high-end side, which is basically like a high skill and what is qualified as abstract type of tasks. So this will be. I mean, first of all, they will be probably less affected by the in terms of their their incomes, and the demand for this type of jobs will remain high, and the supply also is much more feasible, I guess, even in the intermediate post pandemic period. The interesting part is, I think, the low end of the job the labor market distribution, where you have low skill and service manual type of jobs, which kind of derived from the replacing number of manufacturing routine jobs and tasks. And so the low end of the labor market is quite heterogeneous. So I mentioned that the pandemic itself kind of highlighted the importance of certain service jobs in healthcare, particularly. Also in other, like, in if you want, in the food retail. So the sectors that have growth in this period is basically the food retail, generally the food sector, I would say, and then it's health sector, and there's a few others, like small sectors related to services. So from other hand, there's a big share of this service sector which provides individual, personal, face-to-face services, and this, I guess, given the logic I just kind of developed, they must be affected, because the link between the supply and demand is disrupted during this crisis. So this is quite important part of the labor market of the workers that has to be considered in this situation. And so with recovering from the pandemic, we can expect that some of this in face-to-face services should start coming back and recovering. But this disruption causes unemployment. Is it going to be short-term or long-term? Is another situation, another question. And then important is what kind of measures to be could be implemented or could be applied. Number of measures already discussed, but one thing that is also important, and that is in line with using technologies to improve mediation in the labor market, basically to help this churning in the labor market, matching workers and jobs to be improved. It is not a new measure, obviously, not new strategy, but it could be quite relevant, and it's in line using technology more, different platforms and so on, and help basically workers that lost their jobs. Usually, this will be workers with non-standard arrangements, what they call. They can get back quicker to their jobs. And another thing is that it's a kind of more like a general level. It's about using new technology to create. Basically implementing new technology also in the service sector that can kind of complement rather than substitute job skills. So in terms of technological change, technological progress, there is a lot to be done. So it shouldn't take the technological change as a kind of independent or exogenous force. It's endogenous process, and so basically fitting new processes, new technologies to skills is important. There's a literature. There are studies about the difference of the effects of new technology in developed and developing countries, and it's found that there is a mismatch. So there's an issue of mismatch between skills and new technologies. So it's important to be taken into account. So it's not about only implementing new technology. So it depends on the actual absorptive capacity, which is well known. And so in this sense, so developing countries, they cannot directly replicate what is being done in developed countries. So there should be really context-specific sort of interventions. But yeah, in all this, the role of the state increases. So it's all this. You need a coordination. So the question is that. So obviously now in the post-COVID economy, so the role of the state increases, and then yeah, one can wonder to what degree the free market is important, and to what degree regulation and government involvement is important. So answers are maybe quite obvious.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. I think, sir, the polarization in the labor market takes place particularly because of the high skill laborers, as you have already indicated. They are there, and the low skill the laborers, they are there, but the middle skill ones, they have been replaced by some of the as you have observed, that the new technology has changed that middle skill order. So there is, on the one hand, there is low skill laborers, and on the other hand, there are high skill. So it has been polarized. I think that was the answer. Now, thank you, sir. Our next question, again from our students. They are Rishabh Mukherjee and Sridip Mitra. Rishabh Mukherjee, are you there? Rishabh.
Hello, sir. Can you hear me?
Please introduce
sir,
yourself.
I think Rishabh is having some connection issues, so I'll carry on. Thank you, sir, for taking my question. Hello everyone. I'm Sridip Mitra from the second year economics department of the Heritage College. So my question is for Dr. Shravani Shah. So, ma'am, how, according to you, is this pandemic going to induce transition in production methods in terms of substitution of labor by capital, given that social distancing seems to be a new custom in the mode of living from now?
Yeah, thank you for your question. And what we can see that in terms of manufacturing sector, it is not only that supply side effect, there is also side effect also, because a lot of industries like in UK, Rolls-Royce, they are cutting huge amount of labor force because there is not much demand at all. So maybe when economy is opening up, maybe that demand side effect will slowly reduce. But in terms of even that there is demand, now how we can produce, right? This new norm and social distancing. Definitely, we can see that to some extent, mainly just like use of technology is one of the things. Like use the social distancing, other norms, but again, the situation is that transition, lot of substitution we can see labor to capital. That is very evident, and that is very evident. So, which is maybe developed country, they can survive because we can see that developed country, they are also having lot of shortage of skilled people. So that's why they rely on migration efficient people. But in developing countries, it is very difficult, like to substitute capital to labor. That we already know about is going to happen. So technology and use of robotics, that is one of the important transitions that we see, that substitution from labor to capital. And definitely that will increase unemployment, and we are talking about jobless growth now. India is one of the examples that we have seen last 2 years. Output is growing, at the same time unemployment is growing. So this is one of the examples that why it is happening, because it is a substitution from capital, labor to capital. So we are having our growth, but we can see that unemployment at the same time. So it impact is more on again skilled rather than unskilled.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thanks a lot, ma'am.
Now, we have some of our alumni students, Rahul Dash and Devangsh Bihani, alumni of our Heritage College. They have their question. Rahul, can you introduce yourself and put the question?
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am, for the discussion, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rahul, and I am an ex-student of the college. Is Devansh there?
Yes, yes.
Devangsh, please.
Hello, everyone. So I am Devansh Bihani. I am an ex-student of the Heritage College. So my question is to Dr. Shravani Shah, ma'am. Ma'am, can this pandemic create a process of reverse globalization and hence can create some negative externalities upon the labor market?
Yeah, that is, it is a very good question, and thank you for the question. And we can see that it is a problem because globalization is, to my view, that it is creating a threat to the situation at the moment. Because of globalization, we can see that countries, they are dependent one to each other. So if something happen in one country, its effect is, like I said in the beginning, that even the greatest hit health-wise is more developed countries compared to, especially in Asian countries, they are not that hardest hit. But because of that production and economic contagiousness, so they are suffering a lot. So in that case, definitely we can see that global, to further openize their economy, maybe country can think twice. So one good aspect I can think of in India, because even there is not much import or export, but there is a huge local demand there. So if they even without exporting, India can survive because they have their own market. So in that respect, it is good way that, okay, but definitely globalization also helpful, because we can see that that can overcome the shortages of capital, technology, and labor. Now in this respect, we can see because of that unemployment is growing. It is not only developed country, developing country, everywhere unemployment is growing. And if a country has, even if we can think of that, this migration mostly we see developing to developed countries. Now developed countries, they're having experiencing a very high volume of unemployment. Like in UK, we are thinking that maybe next quarter unemployment goes to 10%. US, we can see unemployment is even in terms of volume, US unemployment is like 21 million, which is the size of the population of Australia. So the volume of unemployment we can see. So in that respect, I feel like country or government, they definitely think of protecting their job for their own people rather than bringing people from outside. So this consideration will be there, but and also we can see that it is a substitution from capital to labor to capital. So again, there will be some unemployment there. So it is a two-way effect. One way that because of that demand side, supply side effect, and also we can see that the effect is substitution, labor to capital. So unemployment will grow. So definitely we can see some type of effect on that marginalization.
Thank you, ma'am.
Sir, can I ask one more question? Like, can I ask one more question to the ma'am? Like, sir, based on her PPT, we saw many different statistics. So, like, currently we know that many countries are in the phase of recession. Like, they are going into deep recession. So, ma'am, based on your study, like, when can we expect the country to go towards the upward side of the business cycle? Like, from how many months we can look forward?
Difficult question.
That is an interesting question. Again, we see that the total effect, what will happen, it is not known yet. Now the question is, definitely, if economy open up, then demand side, we can resolve the demand side problem to some extent, definitely. Not 100%, but to some extent, we can resolve the demand side problem. And also, most of the countries' government, they are providing lot of relief measure so that people can have money to survive, or to have, they can increase the demand. So demand side policy is much more quicker. So, but if we look at the supply side impact in terms of labor market and that impact will be a bit slower.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Because of the paucity of time, we cannot take more questions. I think in the meantime, the questions put in the chat box, the answers are already being made by Dr. Dragana. Some of the answers are there. Now, thanks to all of you for your questions. I would now like to request our Honorable CEO, sir, are you there? Or Pradeep Agarwal ji to say a few words. I think he's not there. I would now like to request our Honorable Principal to say a few words. Sir.
It's a wonderful session. Perhaps I should not hesitate to say that for the first time, I heard all of you with all my attention, with all my sincerity, etc. And no word is sufficient to appreciate it. I believe that my students and all the persons who are present in this particular webinar are enlightened, and I believe that your lectures will leave an indelible mark on the minds and souls of the future economists and the present economists, the teachers of economics department of various sister institutions, and that will help them to have a thought-provoking lecture on the part of their own after being enlightened by all of you. So I express my heartfelt thanks and gratitude with the expectation that if in the near future, if you get any opportunity to come to India, the Heritage College will expect you in our college, and the students will ask you, and I think the students will enjoy the session to a great extent. I once again express my heartfelt thanks and gratitude to all of you, as all of you have enlightened us to a great extent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. I would now request our Professor Pooja Putatunda, guest faculty of the Heritage College Department of Economics, to deliver the formal vote of thanks.
Respected Shri Pradeep Agarwal, CEO of the Heritage Group of Institutions, respected Dr. Pushpita Ranjan Bhattacharya, Principal of the Heritage College, respected panelists of today's webinar, Dr. Shravani Sahar, Professor Marian Rizov, and Dr. Dragana Radikic of Lincoln International Business School, University of Lincoln, UK, other dignitaries, faculty members, and student participants of today's webinar. It is my proud privilege to have been asked to propose a vote of thanks on this occasion. I, on behalf of the Department of Economics of the Heritage College and on behalf of the Principal of the Heritage College, express our deep gratitude to Shri Pradeep Kumar Agarwal, CEO, the Heritage Group of Institutions, for his constant support to organize this webinar. We convey our sincere thanks to Dr. Shravani Sahar, Senior Lecturer in Economics, Lincoln International Business School, University of Lincoln, UK, Professor Marian Rizov, Professorial Chair in Economics, Lincoln International Business School, University of Lincoln, UK, and Dr. Dragana Radikic, Senior Lecturer in Economics of Lincoln International Business School, University of Lincoln, UK, for accepting our request to be the panelist of today's webinar despite their busy schedule and for throwing some new light upon the main theme of this seminar. We are all inspired by your erudite lecture. I must also mention our deep sense of appreciation for Suhasini Chaudhary, Industrial Relations Officer, the Heritage Group of Institutions, for her untiring support and cooperation to make this webinar a success. We would also like to acknowledge our gratitude to Mr. Praveen Roy, Executive Director, the Heritage Group of Institutions, Dr. K.K. Chaudhary, Advisor, the Heritage Group of Institutions, Sri Santosh Ray, Deputy General Manager, the Heritage Group of Institutions, Sri Manoj Saraugi, Head HR and CFO, the Heritage Group of Institutions, Sri Devashish Karmokar, Head Systems Operation, the Heritage Group of Institutions, and other KBT staff members for their kind support in this respect. We want to convey our special thanks to Dr. Tarun Palik, MD, MRCGP, GP Principal, Whitfield Surgery and Director, Whitfield Limited, Bedfordshire, UK, since it is he through whom we could establish contact with Dr. Shravani Sahar and other distinguished speaker of today's webinar. No word is sufficient to appreciate the support that we have received from Dr. Pushpita Ranjan Bhattacharya, Principal of the Heritage College. Thank you, sir, for your untiring help and cooperation. It goes without saying that the entire work would not have been effectively carried out unless we received necessary support and cooperation from Dr. Debashish Majumdar, HOD, Department of Economics, and Professor Amitabh Ghosh, HOD, Department of Commerce, the Heritage College, and the heads of other department and faculty members of the Heritage College. I am really thankful to all of them, particularly to Professor Ankita Rajgaria, Assistant Professor of Department of Economics, and today's MC, Professor Shriparna Bishwas, Assistant Professor of Department of Economics, for their full-fledged support and cooperation. Dr. Kavita Shastri, Joint Registrar, the Heritage College, Sri Rajdeep Konar, Administrative Officer of the Heritage College, and other administrative staff of the Heritage College also deserve special appreciation since they always have been an integral part of this continuous process of organizing this webinar. We are also thankful to our student participants who have made this webinar more vibrant, not only through their presence, but also raising relevant questions on this issue. Finally, I would like to take this opportunity to place on record our hearty thanks to the technical staff of Kalyan Bharti Trust to make this webinar a success. Thank you.